What's up, fish heads? Tony Baber here. I got a question for you. What's one of the most important tools that you have in your tackle box? For me, it's my fishing line. It's what directly connects me to that fish on the other end of my cast. And my favorite brand that I've been using for years is Pline. We're going to go over some of the options that they have available and also how I apply it to my fishing. So let's get to it. So just to give you a little bit of history as far as what led me to start using the P-Line products, when I first got back into bass fishing and really started thinking about it in a serious manner as far as taking it to tournaments and just really competing and doing things at a higher level than what I was doing, I wanted something as far as a line that would be dependable and just consistently perform well for me, and something I could have a lot of confidence and trust in that it's going to be what I need and that it's going to perform the way that I need it to perform. So I went through and I tested a bunch of different brands, tried mainly their fluorocarbons just to see kind of how that would perform in terms of sensitivity and ruggedness, as well as what the memory was like. And ultimately, all the other brands that I had tried, I noticed a lot of issues with memory. Of course, that's common with fluorocarbon, but as I came to P-Line and started testing out their FluoroClear, which is a copolymer that they offer, I realized that the issues as far as memory and performance and stuff like that didn't seem near as bad as what I had experienced with some of the other brands. So I then tried out their 100% fluorocarbon, and I was blown away by the performance of it. Not only did it have great sensitivity, but it also didn't have near the memory issues that it seemed like some of the other brands had. So that kind of sold me on that. So from there I expanded. I used more of the FluoroClear copolymers. I went and tried their monofilament and just tried out a bunch of their different lines and just absolutely fell in love with everything that I tried. So from there, I just started fishing with everything from their mono to their braid to the copolymer to the fluorocarbon. And then within a couple years of me starting to use it, they came out with one of my favorite lines that I use on almost all my applications across the board is the tactical fluorocarbon. They offer it everything from 6 pound all the way up to 25 pound test. They have 1,000 yard spools that they came out with recently, which is of course something that I love being a tournament fisherman. And as much line as I go through in the course of a season, I love having that ability to just spool up and not have to worry about running out of line or not having enough line. So I've got a bunch of this. I've got more coming, of course. And then I also like the little 200 yard like filler spools of it too, because if there's just like one particular thing that I need, like maybe I'm not using 25 pound test for as many applications, so I don't need 1,000 yards because it would probably take me a couple years to get through it. So I, can use those 200 pound or 200 yard filler spools of the 25 pound, and it'll get me through what I need to get through. So tactical fluorocarbons by far my favorite. I use it on everything from pitching jigs and creature baits. I use typically 20 pound test. I go down to 17 pound. If I'm getting into grass or something, I might consider doing 25 pound test. Just depends on how thick and gnarly it is. But that's kind of how I use those for that. And then for like the square bills and spinner baits, I use the tactical fluorocarbon as well. And typically that's anywhere from 10 pound to 15 pounds. For my spinner baits, I like to use that 15 pound. I feel like it's a good solid weight that's kind of middle of the road that I don't have to worry about, brushing up against brush or trees or anything, because I like to throw my spinner baits around a lot of cover. So I want something that's going to be durable and strong enough to be able to horse those fish out of those situations if I do hook into the good one. And then the square bill, of course, that's kind of a different range of lines and stuff depending on what my application is. If I want to go deeper with that square bill, I might go up to a 10 pound. If I want to have something that's a little bit hardier that will deflect off of some maybe chunk rock or just a little bit more dangerous situations to where I need a little bit more resistance and a little bit better line performance, and I might bump up to 17 pound. Now I don't do that very often. I would say 12 to 15 pounds pretty much what I use most often, and probably 12 pound more than anything, just because I like having the thinner line but I also like having that 12-pound strength to be able to take it through those different situations that you typically fish a square bill in. Now that's going to move me on to the braided line. So obviously there's a bunch of different applications and ways that you can use braid line. I like using the TCBX. It's a Teflon coated line so that you get a lot better casting performance out of it. You don't have as much abrasion as you typically have with like the untreated line, braided lines. It's a darker colored line. I don't know that you can really see it too well here, but like their braid just has a darker green to it than what some of the other brands have, which I like. Because you see a lot of people, they'll use markers and stuff to darken up their line and things like that, but I like this because it starts off darker. So when it does start to fade, because all braided line does fade, when it does start to fade, it's not as noticeable, and it takes a lot longer before you have to worry about doing things like treating your line with a Sharpie or anything like that to get it darker. I also use the high vis yellow, which is something I use more of a backing, obviously, for my spinning reel applications, which, if you guys know me at all, I'm not a big, huge spinning reel fan. Like, I don't use them a lot. Obviously, they have their purposes, and finesse fishing is finesse fishing, and sometimes you just have to do what you have to do. So when I do use it, I have usually a 30-pound, 20 or 30-pound high-vis yellow backing on it that I use, and then I'll tie on typically the tactical fluorocarbon leader, or I'll use the 100% fluorocarbon leader. It just depends on kind of the application. I like the tactical because it's so much more resistant to things like abrasion and stuff, or if it does have abrasion to it, I've just not noticed any huge issues with it being super brittle and breaking. You can bring fish in, your line will be tore up, and it didn't break. You were able to actually land that fish. If I'm looking for something a little bit more just open water, or a little bit more, I don't want to say sensitivity, but just something a little bit more rigid, I guess you could say, as far as sensitivity goes, I switch over to the 100% fluorocarbon. There's just something about the way that it feels compared to the tactical that's a little bit different. It's not a huge difference, but like I said, overall the tactical's kind of my go-to. It's the best performing fluorocarbon, but sometimes I find that, like with shaky head presentations and stuff, I like having that 100% fluorocarbon in contrast. And then the last thing I want to kind of cover is, well, I should say the second to last, would be the new line that they came out with, I believe it was last year, and that's the topwater line. This is something that was in development for a little while with them, and it's a copolymer line. So it's got that coating on it, but it's got that makes it a little bit harder, I guess you could say, or a little less stretch, but it still has a lot of the performance of like a monofilament. So the great thing about it is that it floats. You don't have any problem with it becoming waterlogged and not floating as well, losing that resistance to the water a little bit like monofilament sometimes can. With the topwater, I've never had an issue with it sinking or anything like that. It performs just as well as braid as far as that goes, but the beauty of it is it does have a little bit of that stretch, a little bit of forgiveness as far as with your topwater fishing. So it's great for those treble hook topwaters that you want to have just a little bit of forgiveness so you're not ripping the hook out of their mouth and you can play the fish a little bit better. Obviously your rod plays a lot to do with that, but any tool that you can use to try to make things perform better and just have a better result, I highly recommend using it. And the topwater line is something that you don't see any other manufacturers really putting out there. So I believe it's kind of an exclusive niche that P-Line's kind of attached themselves to, or at least offered. And I've loved how it's performed. The memory on it's not a problem. Like I said, that it has that clear kind of visibility to it, so you're not having issues with line scare for the fish. So it's a little bit better than using braid, because I like to use braid sometimes with things like topwater spooks and walk the dog style baits, just because of that reaction that you get out of it. But with the topwater line, I get that same reaction, but I don't have to worry about it if it's gem clear line or water, and I don't want that line visibility to be present or have any effect on my ability to catch fish. The topwater is a great substitute for that, and I also love using it. Like, my favorite application for it would be with a buzzbait, just because I like having that little bit of stretch to it. It's something that I've found helps me land more fish with buzzbait, and I go back and forth between this, and then I've also used the monofilament that they offer, which is the last line I want to kind of cover. And monofilaments are one of those lines that's been around forever, And there's a ton of different ways that you can use it. You can use it from square bills to spinner baits to chatterbaits or anything like that. I've heard people using them for different types of techniques than what you might think to use it for. My biggest thing is buzz baits a lot of times, and I've also used it sometimes with spinner baits, because sometimes that, if they're not hitting the spinnerbait quite as aggressively, it's nice to have that little bit of stretch and a little bit more forgiveness when you're trying to fight that fish, especially if you're fishing around cover and things like that. And this has really good durability to it, just like the tactical fluorocarbon, to where if it gets frayed or any kind of damage to that line at all from cover or trees or whatever it is, I've not had any issues with line breakage and stuff like that. So that's one of those things across the board with all the P-line products that have really impressed me, is line breakage. It's something that you hear a lot of people complain about when they're looking at lines or testing out lines, is how brittle some lines will be in cold water or colder conditions, or how brittle it'll be, around cover. And with the P-line, the whole family of lines, I've never noticed as much of an issue. It seems like my knots and stuff, I don't have a lot of line burn. It does really good as far as that goes. It holds up really well to UV exposure, and it holds up really well in those tough situations, whether you're fishing around rocks or zebra mussels or wood, like laydowns and stuff, like have a lot of little branches and things that can really kind of tear up your line. I've always been able to, knock on wood, land fish with it and not break off a bunch. It's been minimal. I could probably almost count on two hands in the last few years the number of times I've ever broken line. And usually if it is, it's something on my end, neglect, where I've tore up the line over and over and over again and just didn't retie, and then you end up losing a fish. But you'd be amazed at how many times you can go out there, because when you're in the heat of the moment and you're fishing and you're catching fish, and sometimes you're catching them in those bad areas, you tear up your line, you don't think about retying, you just keep going because you want to keep catching that next fish. And this line just performs in a way that allows you to get away with the neglect, which is what I love about it. Now, obviously in tournament situations, I try to be a lot more studious about making sure that I'm retying and things after I catch something, no matter what the situation is. But when I'm out there fun fishing, I tend to be a lot more relaxed and a little bit lazier with it. And this line just does great for covering up those flaws or that laziness. So if you guys are looking for something, or looking to an alternative to the current line that you're using, and you want something that maybe performs a little bit better, has less memory issues, and just overall is a higher quality line at a good value, make sure you check out the P-line brand of products. Thanks for listening. Good luck and good fishing.